Marilou Johnson, a native of the Philippines and mother of 3 young boys, was living in Washington Township, Michigan. She was in the prime of her life. She enjoyed spending time with her family, going on vacations, being active. Little did she know that danger would come right to where she felt the safest. This is her story. Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. And if you've never been here before, I'm Kimbyrleigha. Nice to finally meet you. In case you didn't hear in my last video, I'm launching another true crime YouTube channel, a video podcast by request from all of you, and I really think you're going to love it. It'll be videos just like this, but a little more conversational in nature. Maybe even opportunities for you to come on and do a case with me. Just wait, because I've got a lot of cool ideas. I'm going to give the link to you in the description box. It's called Dark Livity, and there are no videos on the channel just yet. It'll also be available on all platforms that you listen to podcasts on, but all the content will post to YouTube first. I would love it if you were to subscribe. John and I have been working hard getting the podcast room set up, and I'm loving it thus far. It's supposed to be a replica of my bedroom from the 90s, the place where I first got interested in true crime when my grandma made me watch the O.J. Simpson trial. So subscribe so that you're ready for when the first episode drops. And there's no ad for today. Basically, my podcast announcement was the ad, and I'm so excited. But I do want to switch gears because today's case is nothing to laugh about. It's devastating, it's sad, it's heartbreaking. And I actually found out about this case while I was researching another case that I posted a video about back in February, and I will tell you all about it later. But this story stuck with me because while the other case garnered so much media attention, I was shocked about how little coverage this case got because it was brutal. I'm also taking you back to a place we've talked about before in that previous case, Washington Township, Michigan. I don't expect you to remember this location, but it's more than just an upscale area of Michigan. It's known as one of the area's wealthiest communities. This is a place where celebrities buy houses. It's off the beaten path, far outside the city life of places like Detroit, for example. But in order to get us to Washington Township, Michigan, I have to take you all the way back to March 17th, 1957 in Iloilo, Philippines. That's the date and place where Marilou Johnson was born. Iloilo is a city in the heart of the country of the Philippines, located in Southeast Asia. It's known for its cultural and architectural heritage, which dates back to the Spanish colonial period. The city is also home to several national parks, making it a very popular tourist destination. It's also home to vibrant music and art scenes. They have many festivals and events all year round. The province has unbelievable islands. Just look at this. They have hidden caves, lagoons, majestic mountains, and waterfalls. I have never been, but it is definitely on my list. Eventually, Marilou wanted a better life for herself. She truly believed the U.S. offered more opportunities than her home country, so she immigrated to the United States. And I couldn't find the exact date, but what I do know is by 1986, she had met, married, and had a son with a man named James Eric Johnson. He was a photographer who graduated from the University of Illinois, Chicago. They named their first child Jason Irvin Johnson, the same initials as his father, James Eric Johnson. And then just 5 years later, in February of 1982, Marilou had yet another son with James. They named him Jared Edward Johnson, again using the same initials as his father and his older brother, J.E.J. And surprise, just 14 months later, their third son was born. It was April of 1993, and they named him Gerald Everett Johnson. Keeping with the tradition, he also had the same initials as the other men in the household. Now the Johnsons were a family of 5, living in Detroit by 1994. But only 7 years later, tragedy would strike this family. Marilou's husband, James, was diagnosed with leukemia. And tragically, he passed away, leaving her to raise their 3 teenage boys all by herself at only 44 years old. Actually, I think Gerald was only 10 years old at the time. It was absolutely devastating for the boys and for Marilou. She lost the love of her life, the rock of their family, their provider, but she knew she couldn't slow down. Marilou knew she needed to be there for her boys. Life had to go on, things had to get done, and her sons needed their mother more than ever. She was working full-time to try to make ends meet, and she still made sure to be there to drop off and pick up her boys from school, cook for them, and take them to all of their extracurricular activities. She was like a supermom, and the boys called her their best friend. They described Marilou as having such a warm heart. She was the sweetest person, and she just wanted the best for all of them, all of the time. She handled the difficult challenge she faced with strength and resilience, making her a role model for her boys. There was no time for Marilou to be sorry for herself. Sure, she could grieve, she knew she had to, but she also realized her priority was making sure she gave her sons the best she could. They became her focus. She had no other family in Michigan, or the United States for that matter, so they became her entire life. This actually helped her. It helped her heal from the loss of their father. She kept busy so that she didn't have to be alone with her emotions. I know I've been there too. She was able to connect with another single mom though, Gina Gone, and they bonded over raising their kids on their own and being Filipino, and they just clicked. They were like two peas in a pod. Gina loved Marilou's laugh. She had this really cute little giggle, and anytime they had free time, the two ladies would get together and hang out. Marilou was tiny but mighty. Short like me, Marilou was only 5'1", and I'm a little bit shorter at 4'11", but people would underestimate her because of her size. But Marilou was a force to be reckoned with. Isn't that what they say? And Gina used to joke with her that it was the little ones you had to watch out for. They were both tiny. The joke was true. Marilou proved that she was little, but she could take on just about anything. She had made it this far, coming from a foreign country, making a life for herself in the United States, marrying, giving birth to 3 boys, and then having to overcome the shocking loss of her husband. There wasn't a lot of time for Marilou to focus on herself, not to mention a love life. She had learned to become very independent, and she definitely wasn't looking to change that, but she was lonely, and she missed having the companionship of a partner. They say you always find love when you're not looking for it. Well, that was true in this case. It's one of those love stories that you've heard about that sounds like a modern day fairy tale. The knight in shining armor sweeps you off your feet sort of thing, but it wasn't that romantic. Replace the knight and the armor with an ailing husband and a nice gentleman named Scott Blanchard. Scott was a complete stranger to Marilou, but he came into her life and everything changed. Before her husband James passed away, the Johnson family was living in an apartment at Stony Park Place Apartments, and they're pretty nice. I mean, they're called luxury apartments, and it's a really cute, close-knit neighborhood in Shelby Township. Well, Scott was living in the same apartment complex. He was one of the Johnsons' neighbors, and he got to know Marilou, her husband James, and their 3 sons very well. And he was sad when he found out that James's health was failing. Scott began helping the family out in any way he could. It was small tasks here and there, like taking the boys out for some ice cream when Marilou had to take care of their ill father. And then his condition got worse. And when that happened, Scott stepped up even more. He began taking the boys to their football practices and even their games. He would help with grocery shopping, doing anything he could to take some of the burden off of Marilou. She was just so sweet, and he felt like it was the right thing to do. It was the neighborly thing to do. And after James passed away, Scott did his best to continue to help out any way that he could, just being a good friend. But Scott had plans for more. Not for him and Marilou, no. For Marilou to meet his father, Roger Blanchard. Scott was Roger's youngest son, and at that point, Roger had 3 adult children, Gregory, Heather, and Scott. And in 2001, Roger was around 66 years old. His children were actually closer to Marilou's age. Scott was around 33 years old at the time, and he wanted to play matchmaker with his dad and his 44-year-old neighbor, Marilou. He thought that both of them would get along very well. His father was lonely. He had also gone through the death of his wife, and all of his children were all grown up. He had no one, and neither did Marilou. So Scott just figured, you know what, it's worth a shot. And Marilou was hesitant at first, but it was actually love at first sight for Roger. There was just something about Marilou that made him come alive. And the 22-year age difference, it didn't matter to either one of them. They just started getting to know each other and then connecting here and there, talking on the phone, keeping in touch. But it was clear that Roger wanted more. He was charming and he was intelligent, and it didn't hurt that he was very well off. Not just wealthy, Roger was a multi-millionaire. Yes, a very successful businessman. He was born and raised in 1935 in Detroit, Michigan, and Roger was very ambitious. He graduated from Henry Ford Trade School in 1953. The school trained teenage boys in a variety of skills. It was industrial trade work like machinery, drafting, engine design, among other things. Roger excelled and went on to expand his studies by receiving a mathematics degree from Michigan Technological University. Roger was a brilliant engineer. He had a number of patents on products he produced for NASA, and his skills landed him a career with a company called Clipper Precision Manufacturing. They handled a lot of mechanical, hydraulic, and electromechanical assembly. I'm pretty sure the name was changed, and now this company is called Precision Gear Company, but nevertheless, Roger worked his way up, and he ended up becoming the president of this company. They specialized in complex aerospace and military industrial manufacturing, things that I know nothing about, but they sound very complicated. At one point, this company was called ACR Industries Incorporated, and Roger ended up purchasing the entire company. It was an aerospace engineering company. They made components for aircraft, and they had commercial and military contracts. Roger owned ACR Industries from 1977 to the year 2000, and he did very well for himself, especially when he sold the company. So now he was retired, life slowed down a little bit for him. He lived out in Washington Township, which I mentioned before, and he had a 10,000 square foot mansion, and it was formerly owned by Red Wing hockey player Dino Ciccarelli. Look at this place. It has everything. It's got a huge pool, a hot tub on the main bedroom balcony. Imagine walking out there at night on the balcony, candles are all lit, you're enjoying a glass of wine. I know that's what I would be doing. And you're under the stars. Most people can only dream about ever owning a house like this. It's absolutely gorgeous. It was on almost 3 acres of land, and Redfin has it currently listed at over $2 million. It says it's an extraordinary gated estate with custom details and quality materials throughout. I mean, of course there would be. It's owned by an engineer. And right outside the kitchen area, you have access right to the pool and the patio. There's an attached 4-car garage, and then there's a separate 4-car garage for a collector, which Roger was. It had dual staircases, a grand 2-story entry space in the foyer, and a gorgeous open floor plan. It's fabulous, of course it is, and it's also very private. It's tucked away from the road. You can't really see it because there's so much brush and bushes and trees in front of it. And that's exactly how they liked it. This home had 18 different rooms, including a library. And Roger loved and collected expensive cars too. So there was an entire full garage of them. What was missing was someone to share it all with. And he finally found them, the Johnsons, Marilou and her 3 boys, who he adored from the minute he was introduced to them. But let me back up. It wasn't long after Roger and Marilou were introduced that she started bringing him up around Gerald, Jared, and Jason. It had been some time since their father had passed away, a couple years now, but her excitement couldn't be contained. The boys noticed that Marilou was more cheerful, and she just radiated happiness. She was always excited to tell them their stories about these adventures that her and Roger would go on. She told her sons it felt like they had known each other forever, and it was apparent Marilou was head over heels for Roger. He had swept her off her feet. All the boys would hear about was Roger wants to take me here, Roger wants me to go to this restaurant, Roger wants to take me to see a play, Roger bought me this. It was Roger, Roger, Roger. The boys were happy for their mom. She deserved love and to be loved. And of course, like many children, they're apprehensive of who this man is that's coming into their lives. But finally, Marilou introduced Roger to her sons, and they liked him right away. He treated them with respect. He treated them like family from day one. He was kind-hearted, not judgmental, and he was generous. Not just with Marilou, who he treated like a queen, but he wanted to spoil her 3 sons as well. And as teenagers, the boys were very impressionable, and Roger knew how to impress. He would bring them over to his house to see his luxury cars, ones that they had only heard about but had never seen before, and now they were driving in them. Rolls Royces, Bugattis, and not only that, he would take the family on lavish vacations. They would never have experienced anything like this, and Marilou only dreamed about a life like this. She was from the Philippines. She never thought this would be her reality, but Roger was more than willing to give her and the boys anything they needed and wanted. It wasn't just about material things either, not at all. Roger would have dinner with the boys, and he would tell them how much he loved their mother and how much he loved them. He was a genuine person, He had been a loving husband before his wife passed away and had children of his own, so he was a good dad. He knew loss too, not just because his first wife passed away, but his son Jeffrey died in a horrific car accident. He had also remarried, but it ended in divorce. Roger wanted to spend the time he had left in life making himself happy and the people around him happy. The people in his life right now were Marilou, Jared, Jason, and Gerald. And of course, Scott too. His other adult children had lives of their own, but they still kept in touch. There was just something different about having these teenage boys to take care of and to teach life lessons to show them the world. It gave Roger a new purpose in life. And that's exactly what he needed. It got him out of his depression that he had been in, and he was like a new man. Marilou really brought out the best in him. After just a few months of being serious with one another, Roger asked Marilou and the boys to move into his house. He wanted them to be a family, but Marilou declined, at first anyway. It was about a year after they'd been dating that Marilou finally took Roger up on the offer. After all, he had more than enough room in that big mansion. Scott also ended up moving in there as well. Now they were just one big happy family under one roof, and it was an exciting time that spring of 2005. Roger didn't ease up on his generosity either. He would take the family out for lavish vacations and dinners at the nicest restaurants. They would travel the world, and he would buy the boys anything they wanted. He literally bought them cars as gifts. It was unreal. First, it was Marilou. He gifted her a convertible Cadillac for herself and then an Escalade SUV to bring the boys around. Then when each boy turned 16, he bought them a car of their own too. Roger really didn't get out as much once he was retired, and most of his friends had been connections that came from his work on previous projects or ones he was still a part of. Marilou was introduced to Roger's longtime housekeeper, Tanya, and she practically lived on the premises. She was there daily to routinely take care of the house. But Tanya was more than just a housekeeper. She became a friend of Roger's, a confidant. And then, when she was introduced to Marilou, they became best of friends. That's just how Roger and Marilou were. They were so kind and so welcoming. Roger even befriended his plumber, David Wright. They would kick back and have a few drinks after David did a long, hard day of work on Roger's property. And for example, if Roger hired anyone, a lawyer, someone to do his bookkeeping, accounting, even landscaping, or just do anything like fix something on the property, it wouldn't be a surprise if they became a friend to him. And soon they would be enjoying a game of golf or boating or fishing together with him and his new family. Notice how I said new family. Well, not everyone in Roger's life liked the idea of Marilou being part of his family at all. And maybe you can guess who took issue with it. His biological kids, Gregory, age 45, and Heather, age 43 at the time. They weren't far off in age from Marilou, and it bothered them that this new woman was in their father's life, gallivanting around, using his money they thought that they would inherit, until Marilou came into the picture. After their mother died, they figured once Roger bit the dust, they would get his fortune, splitting it among the 3 remaining children. Scott, of course, wasn't the one taking issue with any of this. As you know, he was the one who introduced Roger and Marilou. He wanted the best for his father. But from what I read, it was the oldest son, Gregory Blanchard, that had the biggest issue with his father's new life. And he wasn't shy about making it known either. It was weird because when Roger's adult children would come around during the holidays or a special occasion, they were cordial with Marilou and the boys. But after they realized that Marilou was not going anywhere, that she was here to stay as Roger's new girlfriend, and then she moved into the mansion, they began their campaign against her. They started accusing her of being a gold digger. Oh my gosh, it's the same song and dance every time. But they said she was taking advantage of their father. They thought if she got any closer, maybe Roger would end up marrying her. And that meant that she would inherit his fortune in addition or even instead of Roger's own children. Well, they were not going to let that happen. Not at all. Soon, Gregory and Heather expressed their disapproval of Marilou and her children. And they were not nice about it either. I was sitting here thinking, this is a grown man. He's a father. He's a grandfather. I think he can decide for himself, especially when it comes to his romantic affairs. But of course, Roger loved his biological children as well. He cared how they felt, and he did his best to listen to their concerns. I mean, here he was spending exorbitant amounts of money, which they found to be unreasonable in their eyes. It meant less money for them to inherit. But to be fair, They were also worried about their father's health because he had been drinking more and more since he was having more fun and excitement in his life since Marilou came along. But Roger had used and abused alcohol. This happened after his first wife passed away, then even more when he lost his son in that terrible accident. Once his last marriage failed, his drinking was out of control. It had been a way for him to cope with those losses, and he used it as an escape. But like many individuals who deal with addiction, they use when they're sad, but they also use when they're happy. And recently, with the new lifestyle, including Marilou, Roger was going out more, and his drinking had increased. His children were worried. They thought it could probably get out of hand again. The thing is, Marilou was on the exact same page. She didn't want Roger drinking excessively. She would watch him and make sure that he didn't. However, that seemed to also be a little bit of an excuse for his adult children to start stopping by the house more because, they had to check on him. They were worried. So they started coming around a lot more and getting in his business. It seemed to also increase their apparent hatred regarding Marilou because she was such a fixture in Roger's life. Over time, they really started to become controlling, and they were attempting to stop Roger from spending money on Marilou and her kids. This put a lot of stress on everyone that was involved, especially Marilou. It got to a point where their constant interrogations of Marilou and rude comments made her have a panic attack. She had to call 911 for medical assistance. And one of Roger's kids also had the audacity to say to her, "You're never gonna win." Wow, that's really harsh. But a part of me sees both sides. I don't agree with this at all, but I see how it could be hard to accept that your father loves someone else, maybe someone that he wants in his life more than you. The kids could have felt slighted, and I guess I could also try to put myself in their shoes. Millions of dollars at stake. They probably feel as the biological children, they're owed that money, and they deserve it more than some strange lady, in their opinion, that their dad just randomly met and is now living in his $2 million home with her 3 children. But I still don't agree with berating her and causing her physical pain in the form of a nervous breakdown. That's not okay. Roger had to decide for himself, and he had. His choice was Marilou, and he advised his children to stay out of his business. This was all happening in 2006. By 2007, things were on Roger's terms. It went back to Roger, being generous, spending his money as he pleased, and doting on Marilou, Gerald, Jason, and Jared. Things were good. They had really settled into their lives at the mansion in Washington Township at 5880 West Road. Marilou spent time working out, she went shopping, spent time with her kids, tending to the household, working in the garden, having family dinners, house parties, and getting to know people from their community. She also spent time with her friends. Gerald and Jared were in high school, and Jason was 20, and he was deciding on what career to go into. Roger was into helping young people start their own businesses. He would often give advice to people around him, especially the younger men, anytime they wanted to know how to succeed. Life was good until June 14th of that year. Can you think back to what you were doing in the summer of 2007? Just imagine how different our lives were from what you're about to hear. Leave it in the comments below. It was the summer before I started law school. I just moved into my own place in Jacksonville, Florida. I asked this because I want you to feel the juxtaposition about what was going on in our lives and what was going on in theirs. Well, June 14, 2007, Jared came home from school just like he'd done the past 2 years that they spent living with Roger. But for the past 2 years, Marilou would be there to greet him, to ask him how his day was, smiling happily, spending quality time with him. But that day was different. Jared didn't hear his mom's voice as he called out to her and he came through that front door. He didn't see her anywhere in the house, and she wasn't outside either. That was very unusual. Jared could see Marilou's car was still at the residence, so he wondered where she could be. The house was huge, but Marilou would usually be downstairs at this time of day, or at least hear him call out to her. He thought that maybe she got picked up by a friend and figured, you know what, she'll be back soon. There wasn't a huge cause of concern at this point. But by the time both Gerald and Jared were home and there was no sign of Marilou, that's when they got worried. So they did what most of us would do in modern day circumstances. They called her cell phone. But oddly, it went straight to voicemail. Now that was out of the ordinary. She always answered, especially if it was a call from home. And if for whatever reason she didn't answer, She would call them back in just a minute. But going to voicemail, that was not normal. It concerned the teenage boys. They wanted to know where their mom was. Of course, Roger is home, so they ask him, "Where's mom?" And he says he hasn't seen her since that morning. He said she had some errands to run, and she told him she was going to go for a jog afterwards. He told him he had no idea where she could have gone, especially without her vehicle. And this caused them to worry that she could have gotten hurt. Maybe she was hit by a car. Maybe she fell and got hurt and she's lying somewhere in a ditch. But before panicking, they reach out to Tanya, Roger's longtime housekeeper. If anyone were to have known where she was, it would be Tanya. She knew about everything that was going on in the household, and she was a close friend of Marilou's. So the boys call her, and they ask, "You know where our mom is?" She said she didn't. She told them she would try to see if she could get in touch with her. But just like they had, she calls Marilou's cell phone, and it went straight to voicemail. And at this point, knowing all that she did about the facts, that Marilou's car was at the house, that she didn't greet Jared when he came home, that she wasn't at the house, she wasn't answering her phone, Tanya actually got a terrible gut feeling. She just felt like something bad had happened. Tanya told the boys and Roger that if Marilou didn't show up soon, they should call the police and report her missing. Well, first they proceeded to call friends in the area, anyone that may have heard from Marilou, but no one had reported hearing from her or seeing her that day. She didn't tell anyone that she was going anywhere, and she would never have left them without letting them know. It was getting later and later. It had been close to evening when the boys had begun calling around. So by the time they had done what they could to locate her, to no avail, it was late at night. Finally, a little after midnight, Roger decides it's time to call the police. So he phones the Macomb County Sheriff's Office and he tells them, "My live-in girlfriend is missing." The dispatcher takes this report, including everything we already know, everything that I told you. How they noticed she was gone when Jared got home, how they called her and it went to voicemail. They checked with close friends. There was no sign of her. The dispatcher told Roger that they would send someone out there, and they did. The first officer on the scene the morning of June 15th, 2007, was Macomb County Deputy Sheriff Jason Abro. His job? Well, to find out whether Marilou was really missing or if something else was going on. What is that something else? Well, for one, she's an adult. We've heard this before. She has free will and the means to leave on her own volition. Or maybe there's a simple explanation. Maybe there's a note that no one saw. Was her cell phone left behind and now it was dead? Maybe she's with a friend or family member. Maybe she did get hurt and she's laying somewhere, or maybe worse. These officers have to take it step by step. There have been cases where people have locked themselves in their own basement and then their phone dies. There have been cases where on a site like this, where there could be like a guest house and woods, a person's fallen and they couldn't get up. There are just so many scenarios, and they don't normally start at the worst case first. However, knowing that he's going to Washington Township, there were definitely some presuppositions because this is one of the wealthiest areas, and it's not uncommon for separation, divorce, and even affairs to be a reason why a woman ups and leaves her boyfriend or husband behind. So officers do want to keep an open mind, especially considering the time frame that this was occurring in, which I will mention in just a moment, and I alluded to at the beginning. Another mom had gone missing just months earlier from the exact same neighborhood. So this really made officers' antennas go up. You'll know why. But he sets foot outside of Roger's home, and he is just taken aback by how big this house really is. It's definitely not an everyday place you get called out to. And if they do get called out to this area, it's honestly usually a dispute with two neighbors over someone borrowing their lawnmower a little too long and not giving it back, or someone's cutting their grass over my property line. Very trivial matters. Deputy Abro was in awe. He rang the doorbell. Scott Blanchard comes to the door, and he explained to him that his father was up in his bedroom, and he led the way. When the deputy went inside, he realized Roger wasn't just in the main bedroom of the house. He was bedridden. Something just wasn't right here. It's true, Roger was an older gentleman. He was 71 years old, but it looked like he was just in bad shape. He was incoherent. I guess drunk would be more fitting, since it was obvious looking around the room, Roger had been drinking. There were a number of empty bottles of alcohol just scattered on the floor, on the dressers, by the foot of his bed, multiple bottles. Roger couldn't provide that much information. All he could say was that he hadn't seen Marilou since the previous morning. He did add that it was unlike his girlfriend to leave without letting them know. They asked Roger if he could recall what Marilou was wearing the last time he saw her. He wasn't very specific. He said he thinks it was a button-down shirt and slacks, but he didn't know what color they were. Okay, I really wanted to do this. Please think back to yesterday for a moment. Now imagine being asked right now what your significant other, your roommate, or your kid was wearing yesterday morning. Would you be able to recall it? Think hard. You don't know in advance that you're going to need to memorize these details, and when you live with someone for an extended period of time, days can blend into one another. And I just wanted to put the challenge out there to think. Put it in the comments if you do remember or you don't remember, and tell me why. When I was writing this script, I was sitting there trying to think as hard as I could, so I closed my eyes and I thought, John was wearing a tie-dyed shirt that he made himself. One side was one color, the other side was another color, and maybe he was wearing gray pants, but honestly couldn't recall. And every time I do a case like this, I scrutinize the people who can't remember, but it's actually pretty hard. I can tell you what my daughter was wearing though. Oddly enough, I can recall exactly what she had on. Black sports bra, white cami tank top, maroon oversized jacket, and jeans. I wonder if there's a reason why we remember one person's details over another. Was it motherly instinct? I don't know, you tell me. I think it may have to do with the amount of time that you're with someone. If you're with them every day, day in and day out, you may not be able to recall as much. And I'm sorry to digress, but Roger couldn't recall the colors of Marilou's clothing. He also has no ideas about where she could have gone. Not even guesses, like, oh, she might be over this friend's house, nothing. And that actually raised a red flag with the deputy. As Marilou's boyfriend of a number of years, it was odd to him that there was such a lack of information being provided. It made him think that maybe Mr. Roger Blanchard himself is holding back some details, so he makes note of it. This prompted a new set of questions in a very different direction. Deputy Abro asked Roger if he and Marilou had been in a fight. Had they argued about anything that day? What was their relationship like? Could there be a reason that she would want to leave without telling him? What about the children? What was their relationship like? Any arguments between her and her boys? And Roger insisted there were no arguments with anyone as far as he knew. Everyone had a good relationship and there was no fighting. This doesn't leave the deputy with much to go on. So the next thing he does is briefly speaks with the kids, and he decides to pile them into a squad car and retrace Marilou's jogging path. They wanted to see if there were any clues left behind. Maybe she did get hurt. Maybe a car hit her. Maybe they'd find a shoe or her cell phone on the side of the road. They were looking for anything that could point them in the right direction, and they looked everywhere. They went around the neighborhood, even to the surrounding areas, but it turned up nothing. Deputy Abro decides that he needs to call in an investigator to help him with the case. Detective Mark Grammatico arrives from the Macomb County Sheriff's Office, and at this point, he's briefed on all the information that Abro has. They decide to ask Roger for permission to search the premises, and he says yes. Do anything you can to find her. So they did. They went through the whole house, room by room. And it was actually a pretty easy task because the house was immaculate. Everything had its own place. The only room that seemed pretty disheveled was the main room that Roger was in. That room was lived in. It was unkept. It was terribly messy. But it seemed like a place that Roger just went to be left alone. We will get back to him because there's definitely something going on there. But right now, Detective Grammatico was leading the investigation by going room by room, looking for anything out of the ordinary. Look at this house again. I'm just showing you the rooms. It's huge. 6 full bathrooms, 1 half bath. And you know they have to go to every shower curtain and move it aside and look and see if Marilou was in there. 4 bedrooms on the upper level, the main bedroom on the lower level where Roger was, a full kitchen, a library, laundry room, even a room with a pool table. It was also an office. There was a family room, dining room, and then of course, the exterior as well. The pool area, the fenced-in yard, the garages on site, as well as all the land around this home. It was a lot. And they took pictures as they went through, documenting the way that things looked when they arrived. You can see from these pictures just how organized and clean this home was. They didn't find Marilou anywhere. So they had officers conduct a canvass of the surrounding area, going door to door, asking neighbors if they heard or they had seen anything. The problem is, or maybe this isn't a problem, but it was a problem for the investigation. The houses are not close together. As a matter of fact, the house itself was so large that it would be hard for someone that was even upstairs to hear anything going on anywhere else in the house, let alone a neighbor that's far away. But then again, we know noise does travel. And someone could have seen Marilou leave or jogging, who knows. But back at the house, they actually drained the pool. They wanted to see if perhaps Marilou had drowned. She wasn't in there. And no one at the home had reported hearing anything unusual or seeing anything. The boys were at school most of the day, so they wouldn't have known if anything happened to her. And look at this area around the home. It's basically woods, so it would all have to be searched, and this was a big job. Could she have walked off and hurt herself for some reason? One of the neighbors actually does come forward and tells officers that they heard yelling at some point during the day before. That's very important information, but what kind of yelling? Who was it? And that couldn't be answered by the neighbor. They didn't see it, they just heard it. But it was something the officers took note of. Of course, we all know where the fingers are about to point. It's obvious. The first person that investigators are going to look at is the partner, because domestic disputes are typical circumstances that result in someone going missing, whether on their own or because of foul play. Investigators want to know everything they can find out about Roger Blanchard. Here's this millionaire with the means to do just about anything, perhaps have any woman. Could there be a reason that he'd want to get rid of Marilou? Maybe it became too much for him to handle. Marilou, her 3 boys, all in this house, he's footing the bill. Well, they know there's someone who could possibly shed some light on all of this. Someone who knows this family very well. The housekeeper. She was bound to have seen or heard something. If there had been any altercations in the past, I'm sure she would know. So they reach out to Tanya to get an idea of what the Blanchard Johnson household was like. After all, there were a lot of different personalities under one roof. Scott, the biological child of Roger, Marilou, the boys, the older boyfriend that the kids referred to as Grandpa. But the boys insisted that Roger and their mom, they didn't fight. They had a loving relationship. However, we know that parents can hide things from their children. So investigators turn to Tanya, and Tanya says that she never once witnessed Marilou and Roger fight. But they didn't have a perfect relationship, but who does? Tanya kind of pointed out the obvious, that Roger had a drinking problem, and sadly, it's something that he picked up after those losses that I told you about. After his first wife died, he drank. Then after losing his son in a tragic car wreck, again, he drank. And after his divorce, he reached for the bottle again. Just a side note, when I heard 2 of his family members had died, it did raise an eyebrow or a red flag, and it did for detectives as well. I know things happen. It's not that uncommon, but we're talking about context here. This would make 3 people close to Roger that had died in an accident or now one that's missing. So they had to keep that in focus. Roger was not at an age where he could hold down his liquor either. It was wreaking havoc on his body. His health was declining as a result of it, and it was essentially poisoning him. Tanya explained, Marilou wasn't a fan of Roger's drinking. She loved him, she cared about him, and because of that, she would hide his alcohol all the time. She would put it behind curtains, behind furniture, anywhere she could to keep it out of his sight because it would be harder for him to get to it. It wasn't the best way to deal with this, but he was a grown man. She couldn't control him, but she tried to help him to the extent that she could, that maybe it would lessen the amount he was drinking at the very least. Roger had actually been to rehab before, the Betty Ford Clinic. I'm familiar with this because my father was also admitted there way back in the day. It has a very solid track record of helping people overcome addiction to drugs and alcohol. It's a nonprofit residential treatment center in California. So it's out of the state for Roger. It's across the country, 34-hour drive. But of course, it's only a 6-hour flight. Still, that is not just a hop, skip, and a jump away. It's a full cross-country trip. It's been around a long time. It has a success rate. So the trip is worth it for many people. The center was founded in 1982 by former United States First Lady Betty Ford. Roger had gotten sober before, but recently he got back in drinking, and it started casually. But someone who has struggled with addiction in the past can fall back into it, and that's what happened. Tanya said that was the only negative aspect of the household. The fact Roger was holed up in his bedroom, drinking himself into a stupor most days. But other days he was okay. It was unpredictable. But the thing is, Tanya is an employee of Roger's. So unfortunately, These types of witness statements can be kind of less reliable, let's just say. They don't want to get fired, so they leave details out. Good thing Tanya's able to provide the police with information about another person who may know where Marilou could be. Someone she confided in. That person was her friend Gina, and she gets a knock at her door later that day. She had been friends with Marilou for years. They talked on a regular basis, they hung out often. She was bound to have information that others did not, because she's not connected to Roger. This was a friend of Marilou's before she got into a relationship with him. The officers inform Gina that they are there about Marilou, and they explain she's gone missing. Her family's worried. First off, Gina's shocked, but at the same time, she tells officers that she's hoping this is all just a misunderstanding, that maybe Marilou is just with family, and she didn't get the chance to let anyone know. Maybe she went on a spur-of-the-moment trip, and she would be back before they knew it to explain that she's so sorry, and she didn't want to worry anyone. Gina isn't so sure that there's anything to be worked up about yet, because Marilou was very independent. She had family overseas. Maybe check with them. So when they were informed that Marilou was actually a native of the Philippines, they start to wonder, could she possibly had a family emergency and no time to inform anyone, and she had left to go back home to her loved ones? Well, it turns out a search of the house revealed Marilou's passport was missing. So detectives start to locate family members, and finally they get in touch with Marilou's sister. She tells investigators, I haven't heard from my sister. So she was not overseas with family. Now they've ruled out possibilities that Marilou had left on her own. Her car was still at the house, no other vehicles were missing, none of her close friends knew where she was, and she hadn't left town for her home country. They have nowhere else to turn but to look back at Roger, the man that actually reported her missing and was probably the last person to see her. So detectives start to look at specifics related to Roger and Marilou, starting with the fact that Roger was a much older man. Macomb County Sheriff Mark Hackle joined the investigation, and he wondered what the story was between Roger and Marilou. Yes, it seemed from the outside they had a great relationship, but Hackle couldn't help thinking about the possibility that Marilou could have truly been taking advantage of Roger, especially as he became more unstable. A scenario that went through his mind was, what if Marilou was interested in Roger's money and playing nice this whole time with another motive, to skim off the top or take the money and run? Maybe Roger found out. That would be a huge motive to get back at her or get rid of her. The partner is usually the number one suspect, and it doesn't take long for the media to run with that narrative. Now's the time I finally get to tell you one major reason this community pointed their fingers at Roger Blanchard. Because of another case that happened in the same community. They had been reeling from this case that happened just a few months prior to Marilou disappearing. If you're a loyal viewer, you probably remember this face. Now for her name, Tara Lynn Grant. Does it ring a bell? I covered her case back in February. It was a Valentine's Day mystery, and it ended in her murder. She was also a mother of 3 who disappeared, and her husband was the last known person to have seen her alive. His name was Stephen Grant. Many have said he reminds them of Brian Koberger, the person that's currently charged, awaiting trial, on 4 counts of murder in the Idaho University case. That just happened back in November 2022. Well, I don't want to spoil the Tara Lee Grant story for you in case you haven't seen it yet, so cover your ears and count to 10 so that you don't find out what happens. But the grieving husband was your typical Chris Watts type, crying to news cameras, begging the public for answers, but he quickly became the focal point of the entire investigation, and it turns out he killed his wife, the mother of his kids, and he dismembered her. It was terrifying. So this community had a built-in distrust for this millionaire boyfriend whose girlfriend and mother of 3 boys had vanished. The media actually jumped on Marilou's case pretty quickly, piggybacking off of Tara Lynn Grant's case. Sheriff Hackle had been the main spokesperson in Tara's case, and now he was having to do press conferences relating to Marilou. Just 36 hours into the investigation, he's telling the public Marilou went missing under suspicious circumstances. He was trying to use the media to field leads. It had been a crazy year for this community. They were on edge, and just like in Tara's case, something didn't seem right. Investigators just had to figure out what it was. As investigators pressed Roger to give them more information and kept asking him questions about his relationship with Marilou, he got increasingly upset. He said his concern was finding her. The more they spoke to him and observed his overall behavior, the more they realized this man was not in good health at all. He was quite frail. The physical condition he was in at the time made it highly unlikely that he would be able to cause Marilou, who is much healthier, younger, and athletic, any harm. I mean, of course, there's always a possibility of someone using a gun, but they can't be so quick to even infer that foul play was involved. They merely have a missing person at this point. But if something did happen to Marilou, it didn't seem like Roger could have done it. He was also very cooperative. He let the investigators have access to everything, every inch of his home, any records they wanted. He was more than willing to do whatever it took to help. But there was also a chance that he could have paid someone to take care of Marilou for him if he indeed took issue with something she was doing. That couldn't be ruled out yet. Maybe someone else made her disappear for him. But as far as his body language, his demeanor, it didn't seem like Roger was their man. Jared, Gerald, and Jason didn't think so either. They told the investigators that Roger had nothing to do with their mother vanishing. He was way too in love with her, and he loved the boys. There was no way. So they were back to interviewing family and friends once again, asking if they could think of anyone that may have wanted to hurt Marilou or make her disappear. Tanya comes forward and reveals that there was someone who had it out for Marilou in a bad way. Remember Gregory and Heather Blanchard, Roger's biological adult children? We heard some of what went on, how they treated Marilou, threatening, sending her into a nervous breakdown. But there's more, and it wasn't making them look very nice. Not at all, actually. I could not believe this. Tanya says if there's anyone she thought wanted to get rid of Marilou, it was Roger's children. They hated Marilou and her kids, and they wanted Roger to break up with her. They seemed willing to do whatever it took to make sure that happened, and they tried. Oh, they tried. According to Tanya, a year ago, Roger was admitted to the Betty Ford Clinic, and while he was there unable to protect her, his kids, along with their high-powered attorney, had Marilou and the boys evicted, literally evicted from his home. Not just, oh, we're gonna, have it. No, evicted, forced out, thrown out. She had no choice but to move into a motel. Roger's children got a moving truck. They put all of her things inside of it, and then they locked the doors. They wouldn't let her in. They actually told her, nobody wants you here. And all the while, Roger was not even aware this was going on. Can you even imagine? These evil people actually told Marilou that their father didn't want her there, the man that she loves. And because of that, she didn't even try to contact him. She was hurt. She was upset. She had nowhere to turn and no one to turn to. It was heartbreaking. Well, Scott, Roger's other son that lived with him and Marilou and the boys, investigators want to know what was going on. What was all this about? You got Marilou evicted? And Scott admits it's true, but it wasn't him. His two other siblings got him and everyone willing to jump on board together. And they posed it like they were concerned that Roger was drinking too much. And they blamed Marilou. They wanted to send him back to the Betty Ford Clinic all the way in California. And about the eviction, well, they justified that because they said, you know what, we can kick Marilou out because Roger doesn't live here right now and you can't live here without him. And I'm sitting here thinking, why not? She's a grown woman. She's been dating him for a while now. They live together. This is as much her house as it is his. So who are they to tell her to leave? It was really messed up. Plus, wouldn't she have a say in what happens to her loved one? I mean, I cannot imagine someone taking my boyfriend away without my knowledge and then kicking me out. I'd be in the same position Marilou was in. I feel that this is really overstepping boundaries. Even if they were genuinely concerned, why not include Marilou? Well, because this was an exit plan for her to get out of his life under the guise of, oh, we're just really worried about her dad. Really? No, because they wanted to inherit his money. Wouldn't it make more sense that they wouldn't care about his health? But they had to be sure he was alive and well until they were able to get rid of the woman standing in the way of their cash. Investigators see this as a major red flag. But wait, there's more. Of course, there's more. Why would it end there? Get this. To add insult to injury, Roger's kids went so far as to erase all of Marilou's numbers, anyone else's numbers associated with her. They got rid of anything linking to her. They deleted things off of Roger's computers, his devices, his phones. So there was no way for him to get in touch with Marilou when he came home. Roger was in the dark. He agreed to go to the Betty Ford Clinic because he was under the impression that Marilou was in on the plan. He had no idea that they had kicked her out. Jason told investigators that he remembers going through all of this. It was brutal. Apparently, Roger had gotten a hold of a phone and he was calling friends and other family members and telling them that he wanted to get in touch with Marilou to have her call him. He wanted to get out of this place. He was begging to go back home. And he could only last a week. He couldn't take it anymore. He was able to check himself out and he left. And when he got back home, he was furious. That's kind of an understatement. He was beyond enraged. He thought Marilou had left him. Remember, he had no idea what was going on. Well, Tanya informs him about what happened, that Marilou was evicted by his own children, and he went ballistic. He called them up and he said, "I want Marilou back now." He couldn't believe that they would do such a thing like that. It was disgraceful to kick her and her boys out like that. It was unreal. And eventually, he was able to get in touch with one of their mutual friends, and they were willing to pass on a message to Marilou. The friend explained what I just told you happened, and Marilou agreed to speak to Roger again, and luckily, they were able to reconcile. Marilou and the boys moved back into Roger's mansion. Wow. Okay, moving is stressful. I can't even believe that Roger's kids did this to her. Oh, and it gets worse. As investigators are looking into all this, they find something that seems to make Marilou look really bad at first glance. But they're able to dig deeper. And when they figure out what was really going on, it made Roger's kids look even more evil. This was all about greed, money, and jealousy. It was clear when they found a restraining order that had been filed by the same attorney that the Rogers kids hired to help them evict Marilou. Apparently, unbeknownst to Roger himself, in his frail health and mental state, he was in habitual intoxication. Either his attorney signed using power of attorney, or they tricked Roger into signing a restraining order against Marilou, something he would never do. He even admits that later to investigators when they confront him about it. He said he didn't sign that. But in this restraining order, the attorney said, because of the friction that Marilou was causing his family, Roger wanted her gone, that he was in fear of Marilou and her kids, and they need to leave. On paper, sure. It looks like Marilou was the enemy, the horrible gold digger that was trying to steal Roger's money. That was the way these people made her out to look. But through their investigation, it was clear that's not Marilou. She was a kind-hearted woman. She had no ill intentions whatsoever. The narrative being constructed by Roger's kids was contrary to the facts that they gathered. Roger told investigators his children even had power of attorney over him. They filed that restraining order without his knowledge. Now that's pretty extreme. It never went into effect because there was a court date, he didn't go. But this is very strategic. It was a plan. Consulting with an attorney, building a case against Marilou, a paper trail of incident reports, documentation, so that they could win, as one of them put it to her face during that meltdown. It's obvious to me. Marilou was a problem for Roger's kids, a problem they wanted gone. Even after Marilou was back in the home with Roger, the issues between her and his children did not end. Roger wasn't even on speaking terms with them for months after what they did. They were on bad terms up until the time Marilou went missing. They had the motive, means, and the opportunity to get close enough to her to hurt her. By June 18th, 4 days had gone by since anyone had seen or heard from Marilou. Now it's time to hear what Roger's children have to say for themselves, and investigators are shocked by their response. And they were indifferent. They didn't seem to care. They were insensitive. No concern at all. That was an issue for investigators, but they claimed to have alibis for the day that she went missing. Well, we all know saying you weren't involved is one thing, but you'd have to prove it. So the investigators needed to look into all their alibis. For now, Roger's kids are still on their lists of persons of interest. And they put them on 24-hour surveillance to watch their every move. Maybe it would lead them to their next clue. But now they have to move on to collect more information regardless. This was about finding Marilou. Tanya lets them know that she noticed something else. When she was let back into the house shortly after the initial search that day, she made a note of something. She told investigators that something was off. She said she and Marilou, they were the type of people who like things a certain way. They had routines and habits, and I can relate as well, but they would put things in certain places. Everything had a specific home, so to speak. For one thing, Tanya noticed right away, Marilou's purse was missing from a table that she put it on every single day when she walked in the foyer. She would come in and routinely drop her purse on that table and it wasn't there. She would always then remove her shoes, put those in a certain place as well. Well, they were not how she kept them. They were knocked over on the floor like she had quickly had to kick them off or tripped out of them. It just didn't look right. Even more telling is what Tanya found in the living room. Marilou's laundry. It was all over. It was dumped out of the laundry basket as though she was in the middle of sorting it to be folded or washed. And then she was interrupted. This was huge. Tanya would know best. She was there all the time. She knew every item of clothing that Marilou had. All of her shoes, even her jewelry. And that was another big clue. Tanya looked high and low for a specific piece of Marilou's jewelry, and it was very special and very expensive. It was a necklace that Roger had just recently gifted Marilou just a few months prior to her going missing. And this was not a necklace that someone would be able to miss. It was made of a number of large diamonds. It wrapped all the way around her neck, and then it dropped down in the front in a string of even more diamonds. It was not an ordinary everyday necklace. This was something you would never put on casually. It was a statement piece for special events. Tanya called it over the top. And I've been showing the exact necklace on the screen, and it is stunning. It looked perfect on her. And it was missing. And so was Marilou's purse, the keys to her car, and her cell phone. And those are very personal items. They usually go where the owner goes. When the investigators questioned Roger about the necklace, he had no idea where it was, but he told them that it was a yellow and white diamond necklace, 14.19 carats. It cost him $252,560.61. I saw the receipt. Wow. That is the price of some people's homes. So investigators came up with a new theory. They think Marilou could have been robbed. Maybe someone knew about that necklace and they had an altercation with her. And maybe they kidnapped her. However, other than the shoes being out of place and the laundry being unkept, there were no signs of foul play, no blood, no real evidence that harm had been done to Marilou. Nevertheless, investigators asked Tanya to make a list of everyone that has gone in and out of that house on a regular basis or had been there in the past few months. There was a lot of people on that list, including, of course, the children, Jared, Gerald, and Jason, and Roger's other son, Scott, among others. They had to look into everyone, even the boys. And then something did come up in relation to one of Marilou's sons. Just a few months before this happened, he was arrested for violating probation. This was in relation to a couple felony charges in connection with a theft. He allegedly stole items from someone's vehicle. Well, as part of his deal, Marilou was ordered to pay fees in the form of payments to the court, and those payments were to start in June 2007, the exact same month she had gone missing. She was reported missing on June 15th. That was the day before the first payment was due. So there was some suspicion around the timing of Marilou's disappearance. Maybe she fled because she didn't want to have to pay the court fees. Again, the investigators were unwilling to discount any theory, so they looked into how this court payment might be connected to Marilou's disappearance, or worse, whether one of her sons could have possibly wanted to get their hands on that piece of jewelry. They still had other people on Tanya's list that they had to look into, and many different leads they needed to follow up on as well. And they were just going down the list, interviewing each person who had come by, routinely visited, or worked with Roger in the past several months. Lawyers, accountants, business partners, they were all contacted. Most of them weren't around on the day Marilou was last seen. However, there was one person who was, because he was a regular employee of Roger's, and I mentioned him once before, just like Tanya was always there, David was always there. He was Roger's handyman and plumber. Tanya said David was a friend to Roger. He was a family man. He also was there to help other families as well. He's always offering his services to anyone in need. So they asked Roger about his handyman as well. And Roger sort of repeated what Tanya said to investigators, that David was a friend. He helped around the house doing odd jobs, renovating, fixing things. But they were really close. He was actually like a son to Roger, and he'd be a great person to interview in case he saw anything or knew anything about Marilou. He was always at the house, so they wanted to contact him. Roger also tells them that they're somewhat business partners. Unofficially, though, friends who just help one another out. David had come to him some time ago, and they were hanging out, doing what they love the most, talking about business. And David wanted to start his own plumbing business. He no longer wanted to work for a company, but wanted one he could call his own. And Roger was impressed by his tenacity, and he wanted to help him out. First, he asked David, what's holding you back from getting your business off the ground? And he said, well, I don't have extra money that I need to get things. It was hard when he was working paycheck to paycheck, so Roger happily agreed to invest in David's business, and he generously gave him $50,000 to get started. That was more than enough to get things off the ground. Roger explained to the investigators that they never signed anything formal. This was just a contract between friends, and they basically just shook on it. So David started making things happen. He got a trailer with the name of his business on it, Dave's Plumbing and Handyman Services. He got licensed and insured, and of course, continued to provide services to Roger under his new company. Roger didn't ask David to repay him right away. He had money, it wasn't about that, but he said whenever David's company started to turn a profit, he could start making payments to him. So investigators just want to know the details, like how long has it been since you gave David money? And he said, well, it was last year at some point. They're like, did he make any payments? He was like, no, he hasn't. But the thing is, we have an agreement that until he could pay me back, he would just do work around this place free of charge. So they get his contact information, knowing he would be a good person to speak with about whether he'd seen or heard anything out of the ordinary, because he was there on the day that Marilou went missing. So they call him down to the station, and he tells them what they already know. He's a friend of Roger's and Marilou's. He was their go-to handyman for anything they needed, big or small. Complete renovations to fixing something simple, like their hot tub on the main bedroom balcony. He said that had been acting up lately, but no job was too big or too small. He was very forthcoming. He talked all about Roger helping him out with his business, getting it off the ground, and that he was very grateful for that. It was clear that David was part of Roger's inner circle. He treated his friends equally, whether they were plumbers or lawyers. So they thought David would be able to provide more insight into what Marilou was like, and if he noticed anything out of the ordinary. David does tell them he was on duty at Roger's place on June 14th. He had gone and purchased a replacement part for the hot tub. He said that he did run into Marilou as he was getting ready to install the part. She was leaving, and she told him that she was going to buy some mulch for the garden. If he needed anything, just call her on her cell phone. So they asked him, did you make any calls to her? And he's like, yeah, I actually did. I don't recall what it was in reference to, probably the hot tub, but she never answered. They asked David what time he recalls leaving, and he says around 2 or 2:30 that afternoon. This is really important because it went to the timeline of events and the last time anyone saw her. This was after Roger had seen Marilou that morning. So investigators were anxious to look into Marilou's phone records, which they had already requested. So now they also had David's information and his phone number. And they were able to see what time he called her and get a more accurate timeline of events that day. Now they knew by David saying so, he was the last person to see Marilou before she went missing. And you know what that means. He's now on their radar, just like everyone else. Someone who could have had something to do with her disappearance. So they have to do their due diligence and check David out. They're looking for everything. Tower information for Marilou's phone, the calls she took during the day, the time frame. It was all very valuable information. Undercover officers at this point are keeping tabs on David, just like they were on Roger's kids, just to see if it led to anything suspicious. They tailed behind him as he drove back to his home with his family and just went to bed. Meanwhile, they were poring over these phone records. David had indeed been the last 2 phone calls that Marilou had picked up. 2. But David said he only made 1 phone call to Marilou. Also, the data showed his phone pinging off a tower that was close to Roger's house, so they knew he was there that day. But it also pinged off a tower near a place called West Bloomfield. This was a 40-minute drive, so they wondered why he would leave Roger's place if he was about to fix the hot tub, so they pressed him about it. And he tells them something that stuck with him. Something about leaving because Marilou canceled the work on the hot tub that day after he'd gone out of his way to purchase this expensive part that he needed. He explained to her what the part costs, and apparently she kind of blew him off and she said, you know what, I need to talk to Roger about this, I'll get back to you. They once again asked, what was the second phone call about? And David was again adamant there was no second phone call, only made 1 phone call, but they knew that wasn't true. This made David look like he was lying. He was giving conflicting statements, and no one else they interviewed had been caught in a lie. I mean, sure, he could have forgotten he called her 2 times. But they started to dig in to what business he may have had all the way in Bloomfield that same day. And that's when he stopped wanting to answer questions. He wasn't under arrest or anything like that, so he wasn't obligated to speak with them. He was doing this voluntarily. But since he wouldn't speak, the investigators went back and they spoke with Tanya. She was there that day, so they asked her, "Did you see David?" She said, "Yeah, that's why I gave you his info. I did see him, and he creeped me out." So they wanted to know how. Tanya says she's doing her normal cleaning around the house, and she hears a knock on the back door, and that made her jump. She wasn't expecting someone to be out there. When she answered, she saw David, and he looked surprised that it was her answering the door. And then he asked her, "Well, what are you doing here on a Tuesday?" Which kind of caught her off guard. She wasn't aware that David was keeping tabs on which day Tanya worked. She found it really odd. Of course, she had seen him around the house here and there, but she was never into his business. She was always focused on her own work. She didn't know if David had a set schedule, but she certainly didn't think so. So she wondered why he would be so concerned with what she was doing and her being present that day. It probably wouldn't have meant that much to her if it wasn't for what he said and did next. He explained that he was there to fix the hot tub and he really needed to speak to Roger right away. His eyes were all wide, he was sweating, he looked on edge, and Tanya honestly did not like the tone or his arrogant demeanor. He was acting like he owned the place, demanding her to just go get Roger right now. Tanya told him that Roger wasn't available. And you know what? He'll call you. If it's important, he'll get back to you. That's when David's demeanor made her uncomfortable. It's like all of a sudden there was a look in his eyes and something snapped. His eyes were just burning into hers and his face changed and she didn't like it. So she just closed the door on him and locked all of the doors after he walked away. Maybe since David had known Roger a long time though, he felt insulted that the housekeeper was standing in the way of him speaking with his friend. He had gone and purchased a part to do this work, and he had to work off the debt that he owed Roger. So it might be understandable that David was annoyed, but Tanya actually told investigators she was scared of him. And when they look closer at David's phone records, his whereabouts are not matching the information that he gave investigators. They trace his location after leaving Roger's that day, and it shows he stopped at a gas station. So they go there, and they ask the employee that's on duty if they know who David is, if they recognized him. And they said, "Yeah, I know exactly who he is because he's a regular and he was here on June 14th. The clerk said that on that day, David came into the store, but oddly, he was not his usual friendly self. She distinctly remembered, and that's what threw her off. He was always social. He would ask how her day was, he would be cordial, but not that day. So that's why she did a double take, kind of just being nosy and on guard because David's unusual behavior. And that's when she says that she saw what looked like a footprint and blood on David's shirt. She couldn't be sure, but there was a video surveillance from that store on that day. So they made arrangements for that to be turned over to the investigators. But to be fair, David got dirty all the time on the job. It could have looked like blood to the employee, especially now that the authorities were looking into him in connection with a missing woman. But they were eager to take a look. But before they're able to see what David did on camera, they were pulling up information about any past offenses he may have been involved in, and that's when they stumbled upon a fairly new report on file. It was from a day ago, June 22nd. West Bloomfield police were on patrol near an area of small cottages, and they saw a truck pulled over on the side of the road. So the officer stopped to see if this driver needed any help. And as the officer got closer and his headlights illuminated the rear of the truck, that's when he noticed this man was opening up the back and messing with something inside. That man was David Wright. This was all caught on his body camera footage. It's late at night. It's dark. The officer asked David if he was okay, and he said, "Yeah, I just hit a possum, and I'm giving it a proper burial." He proceeded to open up a garbage bag and show the officer the contents, which indeed included a poor little dead possum. So the officer asked David if he lived close by, and he said, "Well, my family, they own cottages in this area, and I'm just visiting." The officer left after this interaction, and that was it. Investigators go through the tape. I mean, there's not much for them to go off. It's not uncommon to accidentally run over a poor little animal as it's trying to cross a busy road. And they confirmed it was true. David's family did own a cottage there, and his phone records put him there that night. But the very next day, they were informed by an undercover cop that was trailing him that he did something very suspicious. Yes, he did. He stopped by a pawn shop. I wonder why. Well, they wanted to know why, so they followed close behind him, but the store was closed. So he got back into his truck. They continued to tail him, hoping he'd lead them to their next clue, and he does. His next stop, a local self-serve car wash that was open 24 hours. He puts money in the spray cleaner machine, but oddly, he doesn't actually use it. Instead, he's seen rummaging again through things in the back of his pickup truck, and finally, they catch him pulling a big black garbage bag out of the truck bed and putting it into a trash receptacle at the car wash. As soon as David pulls away, they move in, they collect the large garbage bag. No search warrant is needed. When someone just throws things away, it's fair game. So they open it up, and they are shocked by what they find inside. It's blood. At this point, you know what they're thinking. This has to be Marilou's blood. If you watch a lot of true crime, though, it's presumptive blood. They don't know if it's really blood. They can't say it's blood unless they test it first. They immediately put a rush on getting it analyzed, and right away they get word that it is indeed blood. However, it can't be Marilou's because it's not human. It was from an animal, most likely roadkill from the looks of the other contents which were found inside, including fur. Wow. That's a twist in the case. Just when they think they're truly onto something, it turns out it's possum blood, and it makes sense. The officer saw the possum in the black garbage bag the night before, but they still thought that David's actions were odd. Why do you go to a car wash, pay for something, don't use it, and then throw your garbage bags in a public trash can, not the one at your house? That's when they finally get that video surveillance from the gas station. Here's the actual footage. And sure enough, if you look at his shirt as he comes to the door, it does look like there's a dark stain on it. However, this is black and white, and the clerk at the gas station would have had a much better view, and she said it was red like blood. One thing we can see is his demeanor, and even though we don't know what he usually looked like, it did seem like he was in a rush to get in and out. But what if that was just possum blood? Would he really walk into a gas station instead of using a credit or debit card at the pump if he really had a person's blood on him? Well, now they really want to dig more into David and who he is, and they go back to Tanya. They said, is there anything you don't like about David? Anything that has made you feel uncomfortable in the past? We know that on the day of he was acting strange, but is there anything else you can give us? Well, she says that back in February, just a few months before this, she recalls being over Rogers with her daughter. She was hanging out with Marilou, and she saw David go into Rogers' office. She was only able to hear bits and pieces of their conversation, but she could decipher that David was once again asking Roger for more money. More money after the $50,000 to invest in his plumbing company. Well, Roger, he's usually very kind and patient and generous, but this time he went off on David. And Tanya, she couldn't hear the specific words, but it was definitely apparent that Roger was not happy. And when David came out of that office and walked past Tanya, he just had that look on his face. It was what she called the look of death. She said she can never forget it. And then he said nothing. He just walked right past her and out the door. She actually hoped that he would never come back. He just gave off a bad vibe. She had never seen that side of him before, and she really didn't like it. Now that they had all this information on David, they decided to get him on a traffic stop because the other night when they looked at that footage of the possum and him outside, they noticed that his license plate had a violation. It was like expired or something small like that. But they stop him, they pull him over, and they tell him to get out of his vehicle because the violation was an arrestable offense. As they're patting him down, they notice something in one of his front pockets. And this is when my adrenaline starts going wild. It's like, what is it? It was a prescription pill bottle. Okay, we'll just wait until you hear this. It felt off. It was like it was a little bit too heavy to be pills. And the officer looked down. He's in the dark, but he sees something shiny. Can you guess what was inside? The bottle was clear. And at the bottom, the officer saw what appeared to be diamonds. So he opens up the top. He took out the paper napkin, and oh my God, it was filled with diamonds. Big yellow and white diamonds. Look at this evidence photo. They look pristine. They're flawless. Wow. Just wow. So when they get David down to the station, they ask him, where did the diamonds come from? Clearly, the investigators believe that these are the exact same diamonds from Marilou's necklace, but of course, they want to probe David. They want to get as much info or lies as they can to build their case. And David tells them, oh, those are just my ex-wives. Your ex-wives. Why would you have those? Well, investigators put them out on the table like this, and they compared them to the necklace that Roger reported missing. When these investigators are looking at these diamonds, they're blown away, honestly, by how beautiful these diamonds were. They weren't like anything they had ever seen before. You can just tell that they're real and they're rare. Look at the big yellow ones on the top and the crystal clear ones on the bottom. They're just gorgeous. And this picture, it does not do them justice. But would there be justice for Marilou? It was obvious that these were not some random diamonds. They were indeed from the stolen $250,000 necklace. It's June 23rd. They knew they finally had the right person in custody. They just need to find out where Marilou is and what happened. They needed a confession. Only David knew the answers. And they didn't have enough to charge him with murder. It was time to interrogate him. But before he'd talk, he asked to call his mom. And after speaking with her, he said he was finally ready to tell them what happened and that his mom told him that he should do the right thing. He started by telling Detective Grammatico and another investigator in the room that he had always been friendly with Roger, that Roger had given him money out of the kindness of his own heart, but then he admits that he bummed it away here and there. I think that's just another way to say he spent it. He said, I met some girl, and in his words, spiced up her world. Yikes. And then he just spent the money. He loaned some to his brother-in-law, and he tried to come up with ways of getting money here and there. Well, guess what? They were on to his little plan. Bill Cataldo, the chief of homicide for Macomb County Prosecutor's Office, he was listening to all of this. And it's his job to weed through the lies. David had agreed to do the work around Rogers for free. Remember that? Except he found a workaround in order to, as he said, come up with a way to get some money here and there. Extra money to get him out of his debt now. Sure, he was working for free, but when something needed fixing, he would need parts, wouldn't he? Well, he was able to convince a clerk at a hardware store to mark up the products and then to give him a receipt with the cost appearing to be a particular price that was way more than the product really cost. He would then show this to Roger, get the extra cash, pay the hardware clerk his kickback, and keep the change. Roger trusted him, and he was very wealthy. He wasn't questioning these purchases. However, Marilou was. She was getting wise to the scheme. She didn't trust David. She was on to him. So that day when David brought her the receipt for the supposed hot tub pump, which was drastically overpriced, Roger wasn't available. So he had to go to Marilou, and he told her, look at the receipt. It was $2,400. David's like, I bought it. I need the money now. He would have made an extra $1,000 from this scam. David explained to the investigators that Marilou pushed back. She pretty much confronted him, saying that she felt like it was a ripoff. The price was way too high and she wasn't going to pay it. She was going to go tell Roger, and that it was absurd to pay that much. Well, that is when David said, he got angry. He said, you need to pay me now because I already bought the part. And Marilou wasn't having it. Now Marilou was a problem. He said he was just standing there by his trailer and he was putting his tools away. And that's when he saw a knife in his bag. And he took it. And he grabbed Marilou. And he put that knife to her neck and he said, I need money. She was terrified at this point. And she kept asking him and just repeating, what are you doing? What are you doing? David said at this point his plan was just to kidnap her. But as he tried to get her into the back of his trailer, she was struggling to break free. Of course she was. With a knife to her neck, he was pushing her. And finally, he got her over the threshold. And she fell. And she brought him down with her. This was all according to him. When he pulled her back up, he saw blood. Okay, I saw the evidence photos from the floor and elsewhere in this trailer, and I was perplexed. He saw blood? Well, there must have been a lot of it. That knife was either so sharp it basically cut into her jugular with the force of that fall, or there was much more to this story. So they were pressing him for the rest of it. What happened? He told investigators at that point he could tell that she was hurt really badly and she was going into shock. She was just laying there looking at him. Did he call for help? No. Did he try to save her? No, he didn't. So what did he do, you may ask? He went inside and stole her purse. Then he went back to the trailer. He opened the door to find Marilou was still lying in a pool of blood, which was getting bigger and bigger. She wasn't moving, so listen to this. In his words, he picked up the knife and he poked her. He poked her to see if she would be moving, and she wasn't moving. No, you poke someone with your finger. You stab someone with a knife. I don't believe this for a minute. He stabbed her to make sure she was dead, because at that point, he knew he was going to get rid of her and take her things and try to sell them. He went even further. He got a garden hose and he sprayed down that entire driveway so there were no signs of blood. That's why the detectives didn't see any signs of force or struggle. David is fake crying in this interrogation room. It's disturbing. Those are alligator tears for sure. He says, it was an accident. Well, I don't think so, and neither did the authorities. They believed David went there with the intention of stealing from Roger. He already was doing so continuously by overcharging him, but David was even more desperate because he had run out of all of the money that Roger loaned him. Investigators think David was going to do whatever it took to get that cash, even if it meant killing for it. After he killed Marilou, he drove to get some gas at that gas station. That's when we see him on the surveillance camera. Then he drove Marilou's body out to Bloomfield. I showed you this area. It's about 30 miles away. And they had questioned him about why he was there. Remember that? And he said he was supposed to be fixing the hot tub. That's what piqued their interest in him to begin with. Well, his family owns property. It's on a lake called Lake Cass, a lake where he disposed of Marilou's purse by throwing it right in the water and watching it sink. But this is where the plan gets even more sinister and evil if it wasn't already. It's getting later at this point, so he quickly dug a shallow grave and dumped her remains inside. Hardly a proper burial. A heartbreaking murder is the cause of her untimely death. Then a few days later, he gets worried because he's thinking that someone is going to stumble upon what he left below that shallow surface. He tells investigators he was starting to panic. He was thinking, oh my gosh, they're going to send cadaver dogs onto his family's property and they're going to dig up Marilou. So he went back there, dug her up himself before anyone else could. And then he took his time. He tied cinder blocks to Marilou's body before putting her on a kayak and bringing her out into the middle of that lake, where he dropped her to her final resting place below the water surface. But he went a step further. He was so worried about getting caught that he got some roadkill and he placed it where Marilou's body had been in that shallow grave. This would serve as a decoy, just in case a dog were to signal in that area. And that must have been when that officer caught him that night. He was stopped on the side of the road. That garbage bag was full of animal blood that they found at the car wash. He had picked up that possum, brought it back to the original grave as a distraction, as a decoy. He even drew a map of where he said he left Marilou, and this is the actual drawing on the screen. He showed a bridge, a creek, the cottage, some houses. And then there where it says 20 feet out, he wrote Marilou, and underneath her name, he wrote R.I.P. and drew a cross. How haunting, how disgusting. Detective Grammatico wasted no time. While other detectives are taking care of David and hearing the rest of his confession, Grammatico raced out of there and put a dive team together, including himself. He got suited up and he was ready to dive below the surface and look for Marilou. They drove out to that lake and they got ready to reach its depths. But before they did, a fisherman called in. He had information about something peculiar he saw on his underwater navigation camera. The dive team, including Grammatico, dove in the direction the fisherman had told them to go. It was 30 feet deep, murky and foggy underneath that water, which made it very eerie to be going down there and looking for human remains. But as they got deeper, the water got clearer and clearer, and soon it was clear enough that they could see Marilou. She was wrapped in sheets, and her long dark hair was floating out of the top. They found her purse too, and inside was her wallet, her passport, jewelry items, and the necklace. But all the diamonds were removed. David had even poured dirt inside the purse to weigh it down, and then he tossed it into the lake. When he was confronted with the proof that the necklace was in the purse, he insisted, "Oh, I stole that necklace weeks before this." Weeks before the accident happened with Marilou. Typical of so many other criminals, he thought he was so smart. He thought this would fool detectives into thinking there was no real motive to that plan to kill Marilou, to take the necklace. He tried to separate the necklace from the story so it looked like he merely wanted to be paid for the hot tub pump that he purchased, even though we know he was hiking up the price. But detectives don't fall for his lies, because you know what doesn't lie? Marilou's body. The medical examiner confirmed that her death was a homicide. This was not an accident. She had been stabbed 5 times in the chest, and her throat was cut. 2 of those wounds went into her heart. How sad that the trailer that Roger helped David purchase for his business was where the love of his life took her last breath, where David cruelly and callously tried to conceal his evil actions. Detective Grammatico had to break the news to Roger himself. There were no right words to say to this family. They lost their mother, their partner. As Roger was being informed, Sheriff Hackle told Marilou's sons, and it was overwhelming for these boys who had already lost their father. And now their mom was gone and she had been murdered. One of them punched a hole in the wall. He was so upset. And Roger couldn't cope. No one could hold it together. When Tanya found out, she got into her car in the driver's seat and she screamed over and over again. None of them could believe that they had been fooled by David. He seemed like such a nice person, but he was a monster. And in June of 2008, David's case went to trial because he pleaded not guilty. And he changed his entire story. He was denying having any part in the murder. That's right. Instead, he actually tried to pin it on the one person, probably the only person kind enough to ever have helped him, and that was Roger. David asserted that he came to the house and he saw Marilou holding her neck, and that's when he turned and saw Roger. Roger walked up and stabbed her, and then he instructed David to help him with the body, so he did. The problem for David was that he confessed to his own mother, who eventually told the cops exactly what she had been told, but it was recorded as well. And he tried to get that evidence thrown out. Of course he did. He said he was being coerced, and so was his mother. But the jury wasn't buying it. On June 9, 2008, David Wright was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison without parole for larceny, kidnapping, and felony murder. Marilou's family couldn't believe that a person could have that much greed that they would take the life of a mother, or anyone for that matter, for money. Their mother was gone, out of nowhere, and they wanted to make it clear how shocking this was, that you never know what the next day will bring. She was just there, and then she was gone. You don't know how precious something is until it's not there anymore. Sadly, Roger couldn't handle what happened. His health continued to decline, and he passed away just months after this happened in November of that same year. However, he always took care of Marilou's sons. He made sure that they were given money as part of a settlement agreement that he had to enter into with his own biological children. And that was completely separate from this case. But that's the type of man he was. He made sure that Marilou's boys were taken care of in that settlement agreement. It addressed cars, jewelry, and money, in addition to an insurance policy that he obtained for Marilou. This case, like so many others, is just so sad because we think about someone like Marilou and we think about someone in our lives that reminds us of her, or someone like Roger. You never know when their last day will come. And I think my message today is the same as Marilou's sons. They said you never know what tomorrow brings. So hold your loved ones close. Don't take a minute for granted. And I thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video, to give this family your time, your attention, and I hope you always remember them. No material possession is worth someone's life. It's not. Thank you once again, and I will see you in my next video. Bye.